Welcome to this deep dive. We are talking directly to you today. Yes, you.
You specifically.
You're an RBT student, you're right in the thick of your 40-hour training, or maybe you just finished it, and you're gearing up for the big exam.
And it is a big exam.
It really is. You've been swimming in this massive ocean of, behavioral definitions, complex reinforcement schedules, endless data collection methods. But today, we are setting all that technical jargon aside.
We have to.
Yeah, we're focusing on the foundation that holds all of that together. We're looking at a pretty hefty stack of sources today: the BACB guidelines, ethics textbooks, real-world case studies. And our mission for this deep dive is to completely unpack Domain F of the RBT task list, 3rd edition.
Which is all about professional conduct, ethical behavior, and your scope of practice.
Exactly. And I know it might be tempting to look at the ethics code as just some bureaucratic list of rules you need to memorize to pass a multiple-choice test.
Oh, that's a huge trap. It's arguably the most critical domain on the entire task list. Ethical behavior is the absolute bedrock of applied behavior analysis. I mean, think about it. We're given incredible access to vulnerable individuals, often right in their own homes, during their absolute most challenging moments.
Right, you're seeing families at their most stressed.
Exactly. And without a firm, unwavering grasp on professional conduct, the best behavioral techniques in the world mean absolutely nothing. They can actually become harmful.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Okay.
Because before we get into the weeds of IPA and dual relationships and mandatory reporting, I want to establish the core operating system for an RBT.
Let's do it.
If you take absolutely nothing else away from this entire conversation, remember this rule. If you're an RBT, you implement the plan. The BCBA designs the plan.
Yes. You implement, they design.
But I want to push back on this right away, actually, because a lot of students hear that and they feel like it minimizes their role.
Yeah.
Like they're just a robot following a script. Why is that division of labor so rigid?
That is a very common reaction, but that division exists for two massive reasons: client safety and professional liability. The BCBA has thousands of hours of advanced training in behavioral principles, functional analysis, program design. They are the architects.
And the RBT is the builder.
Precisely. You are the one actually laying the bricks every single day. The architecture totally fails without a skilled builder. But if the builder starts changing the blueprints on the fly without understanding the structural engineering behind them,
The house collapses.
the house collapses. The code is designed to protect the client from untested, potentially dangerous interventions, and frankly, it protects you from carrying a legal and ethical liability you simply do not have the credentialing to carry.
So it's not about stifling the RBT's creativity or intuition. It's about staying within a safe framework. That makes a lot of sense.
Just a protected boundary.
Right. So let's dive into the core identity of an RBT and how we fundamentally treat people. The sources outline 4 core ideas of the ethics code that candidates really need to understand deeply. Benefit others, show compassion, dignity, and respect, behave with integrity, and follow the ethics code as a strict rulebook.
Let's look at that first one. Benefit others.
Yeah, because on the surface, that sounds super obvious. We're in a helping profession. Obviously, we want to benefit others. But what does that actually look like when the rubber meets the road in a chaotic clinic environment?
What's fascinating here is how the BACB code explicitly shifts the focus away from the agency's bottom line, away from the therapist's convenience, and entirely onto the individual receiving services.
Okay, so what does that mean in practice?
To benefit others means that every single decision you make on the job must answer the question: is this actually helping this specific person's life?
Which sounds simple, but I imagine it gets tested constantly.
All the time. Let me give you a scenario. Let's say an agency schedules an RBT for an 8-hour continuous session with a 3-year-old child, mostly just to maximize billing hours.
8 hours for a toddler? That's brutal.
Right. As an ethical practitioner, you have to look at that and ask, is an 8-hour session benefiting a toddler, or is it just benefiting the clinic's revenue?
That is a really tough spot to be in as a newly minted RBT, though. You're told your schedule by the clinic director, and you're just supposed to show up. Are you saying the RBT is responsible for questioning that?
Well, the RBT doesn't design the schedule, obviously, but they are responsible for monitoring the client's well-being. If you observe that the client is exhausted, crying constantly, making zero progress after hour 4 benefiting others, means you take that data straight to your supervising BCBA and advocate for the client.
You actually speak up.
You have to. You say, I'm seeing these signs of fatigue, and I don't believe these extended hours are therapeutically beneficial. You don't just put your head down and force the kid through 4 more hours of discrete trial training just because it's on a Google Calendar somewhere.
That takes a lot of professional courage.
It does, but it's required.
Let's move to the second pillar: compassion, dignity, and respect. I feel like dignity is a word we throw around a lot, but I want to really ground it in reality. The code states clients are not cases or just a collection of behaviors to be reduced. They are human beings.
Always human beings first.
But when you're hyper-focused on taking data on every single instance of hand flapping or vocal stereotypy, doesn't it naturally kind of dehumanize the interaction?
It can, if you lose the forest for the trees. Maintaining dignity requires a conscious, daily effort. I'll give you a very common scenario where dignity is unintentionally stripped away. You're an RBT working with a non-vocal 16-year-old client. A parent or a teacher walks into the room, and you immediately start talking about the client's toileting accidents or their severe aggressive behaviors from that morning right in front of them, as if they're a piece of furniture.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you're talking about them, not to them.
Precisely. Showing dignity means you include them. You acknowledge their presence. You might say, "Hi, Mrs. Smith. John and I have been working really hard today. I'm going to step out into the hallway with you for a moment to give you an update."
Or you direct the conversation to actually include the client.
Exactly. It also means you respect their physical privacy. You don't leave the bathroom door wide open during toilet training just so you can easily grab a data sheet from the hall. You honor their humanity in every single interaction.
That brings up a really sensitive area for me: the temptation to vent. Let's say an RBT has been hit, kicked, and spit on for 3 hours straight.
It happens.
It is human nature to feel frustrated, angry, maybe even a little resentful. The sources bring up the mandate to provide compassion and respect, but how does an RBT suppress the very natural human urge to retaliate? I don't mean hitting them back, but maybe subtle retaliation, like withholding a favorite toy just a little longer than necessary, or using a colder tone of voice.
That is one of the most difficult psychological challenges of this job. And it is exactly why the ethics code exists as a rigid boundary. It overrides those human impulses.
It has to be a hard line.
Right. The code states firmly that an RBT never uses methods to retaliate. If you find yourself holding on to a reinforcer for an extra 10 seconds out of spite, you are no longer doing ABA. You are acting on personal emotional reactivity, and that directly violates the mandate to provide compassion and dignity.
So what's the release valve for that RBT? If they can't show that frustration to the client, where does it go?
It goes to the supervisor. If you are feeling that level of burnout or frustration, ethical behavior dictates that you tag out, you ask for a break.
Just step away.
Yes. You tell your BCBA, "I am struggling to maintain a neutral tone today because of the intensity of the aggression." A good BCBA will recognize that self-awareness as a massive professional strength, not a weakness. It is far more ethical to ask to be pulled off a case than to stay on it and let your personal frustration bleed into the treatment.
That is a great transition into the third pillar: integrity. Behave with integrity. On a basic level, this means being honest. But let's look at the dark side of this. I want to talk about faking data.
The cardinal sin of data collection.
Exactly. Why does this happen? Nobody goes into this field, spends 40 hours training, sits for a massive exam just to get a job and start lying on their data sheets. What is the psychological trap here?
The trap is usually fear and pressure, not malice. Let's look at a highly realistic scenario. An RBT is running a complex feeding program. The BCBA's instructions are to present the non-preferred food 10 times.
Cool.
But the client is escalating, crying, throwing things. The RBT gets totally overwhelmed, stops after 3 presentations, and just calms the client down.
Which is an understandable human reaction.
Very understandable. But at the end of the session, the RBT realizes, if I write down that I only did 3 trials, my BCBA is going to be mad at me for not following the plan. They might think I'm incompetent. So the RBT quickly scribbles down that they completed all 10 trials.
They're just trying to avoid a reprimand. But the domino effect of that is terrifying.
It's catastrophic for the treatment. If we connect this to the bigger picture, integrity is the glue that holds the entire scientific process of ABA together.
Right, because what happens next?
The BCBA looks at that faked data, sees that the client supposedly tolerated 10 trials, and says, "Great, the intervention is working perfectly. Let's increase the difficulty next week."
Oh, man. Now the client is being pushed to a level they are nowhere near ready for.
All because the RBT lacked the integrity to admit that they struggled.
So the rule of thumb for the exam and for the career is that Fixing errors or admitting shortcomings is always better than hiding them.
Always. You must cultivate a mindset where you are more afraid of flawed data than you are of your supervisor's critique.
That really drives home the importance of the supervisory relationship. According to the task list, an RVT is never an independent practitioner. You must always work under ongoing supervision from a qualified supervisor.
That's a non-negotiable.
But what if the system fails? Let's say I'm an RBT, I work for a large agency, and my BCBA goes on maternity leave. The agency tells me, we don't have a replacement BCBA right now, but you know the client's programs. You've been doing this for 6 months. Just keep running your sessions, and we'll get someone assigned in a few weeks. Can I do that?
Absolutely not. And this is a scenario that tests an RBT's commitment to the fourth pillar following the ethics code as a strict rulebook.
So I have to say no to my agency.
You have to. The ethical mandate is crystal clear. Your certification as an RBT is only valid when you have an active, qualified supervisor. If there is no supervisor monitoring your work, reviewing your data, and guiding the treatment, you are ethically prohibited from continuing to provide ABA services.
But the agency is telling me to do it. And I need my paycheck. And the family wants me there because they need the childcare or the routine. The pressure to just say, okay, must be immense.
It is immense. But if you do it, you are practicing outside your credential. You're acting as an independent practitioner, which is a direct violation of the BACB code.
And what's the worst case scenario there?
If something goes wrong,
Yeah.
say the client engages in severe self-injury and needs to go to the hospital, and the authorities find out you were providing medical behavioral services without a supervisor, you could lose your certification permanently, and the agency faces massive liability.
Wow.
You have to stand your ground, inform the agency of the ethical code, and refuse to provide services until a supervisor is officially assigned.
That takes serious backbone. It really highlights that being an RBT isn't just playing with kids, it's a serious clinical profession. Now, assuming you do have a great supervisor, how do we know the RBT is actually ready to do the work? Let's pivot slightly from the ethical mindset of the actual execution of the job. I want to talk about scope of practice and true competence.
Okay, F.2 and F.4.
Right. We use the word competent in everyday language to mean pretty good at something. But in behavior analysis, competence has a very strict operationalized definition, right?
Yes, competence is not a feeling. It is a demonstrable fact. In our field, competence means an RBT only performs tasks they have been thoroughly trained to do, observed doing, given feedback on, and ultimately authorized to do independently by their supervisor.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I think a lot of newer practitioners fall into the trap of confusing knowledge with competence.
Oh, happens all the time.
Like, I read an article about a token economy, or I watched a YouTube video on how to implement a picture exchange communication system. They feel knowledgeable, so they walk into a session and just try it.
Knowledge is the prerequisite to competence, but it is not competence itself. You cannot read a blog post on your lunch break and then try a new prompting strategy on your client at 1 p.m.
Right.
That is an ethical violation. You become competent through a very specific active supervision process. The literature generally breaks this down into 5 distinct steps: instruction, modeling, rehearsal, feedback, and observation.
Let's paint a picture of what that actually looks like. Let's say my BCBA wants me to start running a differential reinforcement program. I can't just read the paper. We have to go through the steps. First, instruction.
Right. The BCBA sits down with you, explains the goal of the program, reads through the operational definitions, explains exactly what behavior you were reinforcing and what you were putting on extinction, and details the crisis plan.
Step 2, modeling. My BCBA doesn't just send me in, they actually do it first. They show me. They sit with the client and run the program while I watch and take notes.
Exactly. Then comes step 3, rehearsal. And this is where many agencies drop the ball, but it is ethically required. You, the RBT, practice. Ideally, you role-play with your BCBA first without the client present.
That feels awkward, role-playing with your
Yeah,
boss.
it's deeply awkward. But you pretend the BCBA is the client, they emit the target behavior, and you practice delivering the reinforcement. It is infinitely better to make a mistake on your boss than on a vulnerable client.
That's a great point. Then step 4 is feedback.
The supervisor tells you exactly what you did well and what you need to adjust. Your timing on the reinforcer delivery was a half-second too slow, or make sure your tone stays neutral during the extinction burst.
And finally, step 5, observation. You run the program with the actual client while the BCBA watches, either in person or via HECA-compliant video, until they are satisfied that you are fluent.
And only then are you confident to run it independently.
So what does this all mean for the RBT's scope of practice? If scope of practice is the boundary line of my professional capability, it sounds like my scope is limited exclusively to the specific things I have gone through that five-step process for.
That is the perfect way to summarize it. Your scope of practice is defined by what you have been explicitly trained and authorized to do by your current supervisor.
Wait, current supervisor.
I emphasize current because this is a major trap. Let's say you worked at Clinic A for 2 years and you were highly trained in physical crisis management holds, blocks, restraints. You leave and get a new job at Clinic B. A client at Clinic B starts getting aggressive. Can you use the physical management techniques you learned at Clinic A?
I would assume no, because Clinic B hasn't authorized me to do that.
Yeah.
Their policies might be completely different. Their liability insurance might not cover those specific holds.
You are absolutely correct. Your competence in a technique does not automatically grant you the scope to practice it anywhere. You must be trained and authorized by the supervising BCBA at your current agency for that specific client.
Because if you try to execute a physical hold without current authorization, you're practicing way outside your scope.
And the legal and ethical ramifications are severe.
Let's list a few more common scope violations that students might see on the exam or, unfortunately, in real life. Let's talk about parent training. Families are desperate for help. You're in their home for 15 hours a week. The parents trust you.
Naturally.
The mom comes up to you and says, "Can you sit down with me and my husband for an hour and teach us how to use extinction when he throws tantrums at the grocery store?"
Yeah.
You know how to do it. You've seen it work. Why can't you just teach them?
Because parent training, designing the parent curriculum, assessing the parent's ability to implement it safely, and monitoring their data is a complex clinical intervention that belongs squarely in the BCBA's scope of practice.
So I just can't do it.
An RBT is not trained to assess whether a family has the emotional or physical resources to safely implement an extinction burst in a public grocery store. If you tell them to do it and the child's behavior escalates into property destruction or injury, you are liable.
So the answer is always, I would love for you to learn these strategies. Let me have the BCBA reach out to schedule a parent training session.
Yes. Defer to the supervisor. Another major scope violation is toilet training.
Oh, that's a big one.
An RBT might think, well, I potty trained my own 3 kids. I know how to do this. But behavioral toilet training protocols are intense. They often involve increased fluid intake, specific scheduled sits, and complex reinforcement contingencies.
You cannot just wing it based on your personal life experience.
Never. You need a designed plan and explicit training.
For the exam, if a question asks what you should do if you don't know how to run a new program, or if a parent asks you to explain the behavioral mechanisms of a plan, the answer is never try your best, or give them a brief overview.
The correct answer will always be contact your supervisor. Always choose the option that defers the clinical design and explanation to the BCBA.
Which is a perfect segue into how we handle the information we gather. We've talked about the boundaries of your physical actions, but we also have to establish ironclad boundaries around the information you possess. This brings us to confidentiality, privacy, and public statements.
F.5 and F.6.
This is huge. Let's define the acronyms we hear constantly. APIA and FERPA. What do these actually mean for an RBT walking into a clinic or a school?
IP is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It is a federal law that requires the protection of sensitive patient health information from being disclosed without the patient's consent or knowledge. In ABA, because we are often billing medical insurance for medical diagnosis like autism spectrum disorder, we are bound by APIA.
And FERPA.
FERPA is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which protects the privacy of student education records. If you are an RBT working in a school setting, you are often navigating FERPA as well.
Okay, so it's not just an agency guideline, it is federal law.
Yeah.
And the core of these laws is protecting confidential information. Let's define what that includes. I think people know not to share a client's full name or their medical diagnosis, but it goes so much deeper than that, right?
Much deeper. Confidential information is absolutely anything that could reasonably identify a client. This includes their date of birth, their home address, the specific name of the school they attend, photos of them, videos of their sessions, and the specific notes you write about their family dynamics.
Let's walk through the responsibilities of handling this information. The sources break it down into collect, use, store, protect, and disclose. I want to spend some time on store and protect, because I think modern technology has made this incredibly dangerous for RBTs. Let's talk about the electronic data trap.
This is a critical area. 10 years ago, the risk was leaving a paper data sheet on the roof of your car. Today, the risk is the device in your pocket. Let's say your clinic uses iPads to collect data. You're running a session, and you use the clinic iPad to take a video of a new severe behavior so your BCBA can analyze the function later. That is a legitimate clinical use.
Okay.
But what if you use your personal iPhone to take that video because the clinic iPad was out of battery?
Oh, that sounds like a nightmare waiting to happen. Because personal phones back up to the cloud automatically.
Exactly. The moment you record that video on your personal phone, it might automatically sync to your personal iCloud, your Google Photos, or your Dropbox. Now, highly sensitive, protected health information is sitting on third-party commercial servers outside of your agency's IPA-compliant network.
And if your iCloud gets hacked or if your phone is stolen and unlocked, that client's most vulnerable moment is totally exposed.
So the rule is absolutely no client data on your personal devices, unless it is explicitly provisioned, secured, encrypted, and authorized by your agency's IT department.
You cannot take pictures of data sheets to finish your notes at home. You cannot text your BCBA a picture of a client's bruised arm from your personal number. You have to use the agency's secure, encrypted messaging platforms.
And that leads directly into protecting information from public view. This applies to the physical world, too. If you're doing an in-home session, you don't leave your open data binder on the kitchen counter while you go to the bathroom.
Especially if the client has siblings who might have friends over.
Right. Or if you're in a clinic, you don't stand in the waiting room where other parents are sitting and say to your BCBA, "Hey, Timmy had 3 huge aggressive tantrums today." You have just broadcast Timmy's name and behavioral data to strangers. You pull the BCBA into a private office.
Let's tackle the elephant in the room. Social media, the de-identified TikTok trend. I see this all the time. An RBT posts a day in the life of an autism therapist video. They don't show any clients' faces. They just show the clinic hallway, the materials they're using, and maybe they tell a story about a super cute kiddo who finally mastered a vocal imitation goal.
They think they're being advocates.
Right. They think because there are no names and no faces, it's fine.
It is not fine. It is an ethical violation, and for many agencies, it is grounds for immediate termination.
Really? Just for a story without a name?
Yes. Here's why. The combination of details can easily identify a client. If you post a video of your clinic's specific sensory room, and you mention a child mastering a specific goal on a specific Tuesday, a parent watching that video could easily piece together, wait, my child goes to that clinic, they were there on Tuesday, and we just started that goal. That RBT is broadcasting my child's medical treatment to the internet.
Wow. It shatters trust.
It absolutely shatters trust. The BCBA code is extremely strict on this. There should be no client information on your personal social media, period. Even if a parent says, "Oh, I don't mind, you can post a picture of you and Timmy, we love you," you still cannot do it.
The parent can post it on their own page, but you cannot post it on yours.
Correct. You must keep your professional life and your digital personal life completely segregated.
Let's talk about the urge to share with our real-life social circles. I think this is a gray area that catches people off guard. You've had a brutal day. You meet a friend for coffee, or your spouse asks how your day was. Can I tell my spouse about my bad day?
You can say, "I had a really tough day at work today. The interventions were challenging." But the moment you start providing details, "I have this one kid who lives over in the Oakwood neighborhood and he just won't stop throwing chairs," you have crossed the line. This requires applying the need to know rule.
The need to know rule. Let's define that.
You must constantly ask yourself, does the person I am talking to have a legitimate clinical need to know this information in order to provide care to the client?
And your spouse does not.
Your spouse does not. Your friend at the coffee shop does not. Even your coworker at the clinic. If they're not assigned to that specific client's case and do not need the information to ensure safety, they do not have a need to know. Discussing clients with uninvolved coworkers is just gossip, even if you dress it up as venting.
That is a harsh reality, but it makes complete sense. If I wouldn't want my medical records casually discussed in a break room, I shouldn't do it to my clients.
Yeah.
I want to hit on one more thing in this section. Public statements and your own credentials.
Yeah.
We touched on this briefly, but I see RBTs putting autism therapist or behavior therapist or even behavior specialist in their Instagram bios or on their LinkedIn profiles. What is the harm there?
The harm is misrepresentation, and it damages the integrity of the entire field. Therapists and specialists are unregulated terms in many places, but they imply a level of independent clinical judgment and advanced education that an RBT simply does not possess.
An RBT is a technician. You implement.
Right. When you use titles you haven't earned, you confuse the public. A parent might see your profile, reach out, and say, "Can you design a treatment plan for my child?" You are creating a situation where the public misunderstands what an RBT is. You must use your accurate title: Registered Behavior Technician.
And you definitely cannot guarantee outcomes. You can't put on your website, "I will cure your child's tantrums."
Yeah.
ABA is a science of probability, not guarantees.
Exactly.
We spend a lot of time talking about the boundaries around data, information, and digital spaces.
Mm.
But I want to pivot to the physical and social boundaries. The actual relationship between you, the RBT, and the family you're working with. This brings us to Section 4, professional boundaries, gifts, and multiple relationships.
This is an area where the lines get blurred the fastest, especially in in-home therapy. When you're in a clinic, it's a sterile professional environment, but when you are in a family's living room for 15 hours a week, you see them in their pajamas, you see their marital stress, you eat lunch at their kitchen island. It is incredibly easy to start feeling like you are part of the family.
And that feeling is the exact breeding ground for a multiple relationship. Let's define it. A multiple relationship exists when an RBT is in a professional role with a person and simultaneously is in another role with that same person or someone closely associated with them.
Yes. And the BACB code explicitly directs behavior analysts and technicians to avoid multiple relationships due to the risks they pose.
Let's give some realistic examples because it's rarely malicious. It's usually born out of convenience or affection. Example 1, babysitting. A mom says, "You are so great with my son. We haven't been out on a date in 2 years because nobody else can handle his behaviors. Will you babysit for us this Saturday? We will pay you double your clinic rate in cash." Why is this such a massive problem?
It is a problem because it completely destroys instructional control and blurs the boundaries for the client. Think about it from the child's perspective. On Tuesday afternoon, you are the RBT. You place demands, you run discrete trials, you prompt them through difficult tasks, and you withhold reinforcement if they don't engage in the target behavior. You are an authority figure delivering clinical treatment.
Right, I am the therapist.
But on Saturday night, you're the babysitter. Your goal is just to keep them safe and happy until the parents get home. You probably let them watch extra iPad, eat ice cream, and you don't run any programs.
They're just chilling.
When you show up on Monday morning to be the RBT again, the child is entirely confused. Wait, are you the fun person who gives me unlimited iPad? Or are you the person making me do work? It sabotages the treatment.
It totally undermines your authority as a therapist.
Furthermore, it affects your objectivity. If the parents pay you under the table to babysit, you are now financially entangled with them outside of the agency. What happens if the BCBA wants to discharge the client, but you rely on that babysitting money? Your clinical judgment is compromised.
So the answer to the babysitting request is a firm, non-negotiable no. But what about unavoidable multiple relationships? Let's say I live in a town of 2,000 people. There is only one grocery store, one church, and one auto mechanic. And the auto mechanic is my client's dad. My car breaks down. Am I supposed to tow it 50 miles to the next town just to avoid a multiple relationship?
This raises an important question, and the BACB actually addresses this. In rural or tight-knit communities, multiple relationships are sometimes truly unavoidable. The ethics code doesn't expect you to endure severe hardship, like towing a car 50 miles. However, it demands transparency and mitigation.
So I can't just take the car in and pretend it's fine. What is the process?
You must immediately disclose the situation to your supervising BCBA. You say, "My car broke down and Mr. Smith is the only mechanic in town. I have to use his shop." The BCBA will then help you create a mitigation plan.
What does that look like?
This plan might involve setting explicit boundaries with Mr. Smith. You go to the shop, you pay the standard rate. You absolutely do not accept a friends and family discount because that crosses into unethical gift territory. And you explicitly agree that you will not discuss his child's ABA treatment while at the auto shop. You document this plan. If the dual relationship begins to impact the therapy, the BCBA might have to transfer the case to another RBT.
Let's talk about gifts. This is a minefield. The guidelines around gifts have actually evolved over the years in our field. It used to be a zero-tolerance policy. No gifts ever under any circumstances. But the third edition task list reflects a slightly more nuanced approach from the BACB, though many agencies remain zero tolerance. Why is gift-giving so dangerous in therapy?
Because gifts can fundamentally alter the power dynamic and the expectations of the relationship. An expensive gift creates implicit pressure. Let's say a family gives you a $100 Visa gift card for the holidays.
That's a nice chunk of change.
Subconsciously, or sometimes explicitly, the family might feel, well, we gave you $100, so you owe us. You should stay an extra 15 minutes off the clock to help us clean up. Or you should prioritize our schedule requests over other families.
It can start to feel like a bribe. And it creates inequity. If you have one wealthy family showering you with gifts and one low-income family who can barely afford groceries, human nature might lead you to subconsciously favor the wealthy family, giving them better service. That is deeply unethical.
Exactly. Now, the current BACB guideline states that small, inexpensive token gifts are usually acceptable, provided they don't exceed a specific low monetary value, usually around $10. Think of a handmade card drawn by the client or a $5 coffee mug.
Because rejecting a child's drawing can actually cause clinical harm by damaging rapport.
Exactly. But expensive gifts, cash, gift cards of any significant value, jewelry, or tickets to an event must be declined. And you must know your specific agency's policy, because if your agency says 0 gifts, you follow the agency policy.
Let's do some role play, because declining a gift is agonizingly awkward for most people. Let's say I'm working in a culturally diverse neighborhood. I'm working with a family where offering food and gifts is a profound expression of respect and acceptance in their culture. Rejecting it is seen as a severe insult. It's the end of a great week, and the grandmother offers me a beautifully prepared, expensive platter of traditional food to take home, maybe worth $40 or $50. How do I navigate the ethics code without destroying the cultural rapport we've built?
That is the ultimate gray area, and it requires incredible tact. You cannot simply say the BACB says, no, sorry. You have to validate the cultural gesture while holding the professional boundary. You might say, this is incredibly generous, and I am so honored that you thought of me. It looks delicious. However, my professional license actually forbids me from accepting gifts of this value because I need to remain completely objective as your grandson's therapist. I want to make sure I am always giving him the best care without any conflicts of interest. The best gift to me is seeing his progress.
And if she insists, oh please, it's just food, don't insult me.
If she insists, you hold the line gently. I truly wish I could, but I could lose my job, and I love working with your family too much to risk that. You make the bad guy the ethical board or the agency, not yourself. And then, crucially, you document the interaction and tell your BCBA immediately so they are aware of the cultural dynamic and can help navigate future interactions.
Navigating these awkward boundary conversations requires excellent interpersonal skills and a deep awareness of different family dynamics. It's not just about knowing the rules, it's about how you communicate them, which leads us perfectly into Section 5, professional communication, culture, and mandatory reporting.
Let's start with interpersonal skills within the professional team. You could have every reinforcement schedule perfectly memorized. You could take flawless interval data, but if you are defensive, rude, or uncooperative with your supervisor, you are failing ethically.
Let's talk about accepting feedback. As an RBT, you are going to be observed constantly. It is literally part of the job description. Your BCBA is going to watch you, and they are going to correct you. Let's say your BCBA pulls you aside after a session and says, I was watching your implementation of the managing program, and you are over-prompting. You aren't giving the client enough time to respond independently before you jump in. We need to fade those prompts faster. What is the unethical way to handle that?
The unethical, unprofessional way is to get defensive. Well, he was having a bad day, so I had to prompt him. Or, I read in his file that he needs a lot of help. Or worse, you just nod silently, walk away, and keep doing it exactly the same way because you think you know better.
What is the ethical professional response?
A professional listens, absorbs the information, and asks clarifying questions. You say, okay, thank you for pointing that out. Just so I'm clear, how many seconds should I wait before I deliver the vocal prompt? Can you model that timing for me? You seek to understand the correction, and then you immediately adjust your behavior. You implement, they design. If they design a longer latency period, you implement it.
That requires leaving your ego at the door. Let's pivot to how we communicate and interact with the diverse families we serve. The concept of cultural humility is heavily emphasized in modern behavior analysis. And I want to draw a very clear distinction here between cultural humility and cultural competence. They are not the same thing.
They are very different. Cultural competence is an older framework that implies a destination. It implies that if I take a 3-hour diversity seminar or read a book about a specific demographic, I am now competent in their culture. It treats culture like a monolith. I understand Hispanic culture now. That is a dangerous fallacy.
Because every family is completely unique, even within the same broad cultural demographic.
Exactly. Cultural humility, on the other hand, is a lifelong, ongoing process of self-reflection and self-critique. It is the understanding that you will never know everything about another person's background. It requires you to stay curious, to stay respectful, and to acknowledge the power imbalance between the therapist and the client.
Let's explore how invisible biases impact this. We all have personal biases based on how we were raised. Let's say I grew up in a household where children were expected to be completely independent by age 5, dressing themselves, cleaning their rooms, speaking only when spoken to. I walk into a client's home to provide ABA. The client is 8 years old, and the mother still hand feeds him and sleeps in the same bed as him. My immediate gut reaction bias thought might be, this mother is coddling him. She is the reason he has behavior problems. She's a bad parent.
That is a very common, very human judgment, and that is the exact moment where cultural humility must be activated. The goal of cultural humility is not to pretend you don't have those biased thoughts. The goal is to notice the thought, I am judging her parenting style based on my own upbringing, and then deliberately stop that thought from dictating your behavior and your treatment.
So I don't go to my BCBA and say, we need to write a goal to make him sleep in his own bed because the mom is coddling him.
No, you do not. Because in many cultures, co-sleeping and extended maternal assistance are the norm. They are signs of love and cohesion, not pathology. Instead of judging, you ask questions with humility. Can you tell me what your goals are for his independence around mealtime? You gather information about their values, and you bring that back to the BCBA so the treatment plan aligns with the family's culture, not your personal preferences.
Notice the bias, but don't act on it. Now, we have to transition to the heaviest part of this section, and arguably the most serious ethical obligation you have, mandatory reporting.
As an RBT, you are a mandated reporter. This is not just an agency policy, it is a legal designation in almost every jurisdiction. It means that if you suspect, you do not have to prove, you just have to reasonably suspect that a vulnerable individual, so a child, an elderly person, or a dependent adult, is being abused or neglected, you are legally obligated to report it to the appropriate state authorities.
This is terrifying for a lot of people, because if you report a family and Child Protective Services investigates, it fractures the relationship. People are afraid of being wrong.
Yeah.
What if I see a bruise on a child's arm, and I think it's from abuse, but it's just from them falling off a bike? Should I wait and investigate it myself?
Absolutely not. You are a mandated reporter, not an investigator. It is not your job to interrogate the parents, ask leading questions, or play detective. If you observe an unexplained injury, or if a child discloses something to you, "Daddy hit me with a belt," you must report it. If you wait and the child is severely injured the next day, you can be held criminally liable for failing to report.
What is the actual process for an RBT? Do I call 911 right then and there? Do I tell my BCBA first?
You must follow your organizational policies, but those policies cannot supersede the law. Typically, the process is ensure the immediate safety of the client, finish your session if it is safe to do so, and immediately contact your supervising BCBA and your agency's clinical director. You inform them of what you saw or heard. In a healthy agency, the BCBA or director will sit with you while you make the call to the state abuse hotline, supporting you through the process.
But I want to play devil's advocate here. What if I call my BCBA and I say, Timmy told me his mom locks him in a closet when he cries. And my BCBA says, oh, Timmy has a huge history of lying for attention. The mom is great. We've known her for years. Don't report it. It will ruin our relationship with the family. What does the RBT do then? The golden rule says you implement, they design, so shouldn't I listen to my boss?
This is the one massive exception. Your legal duty as a mandated reporter supersedes your chain of command. If your supervisor tells you not to report suspected abuse, your supervisor is acting unethically and illegally. You must make the report yourself, directly to the authorities. Furthermore, you would then have an ethical obligation to report your supervisor to the BACB for attempting to obstruct a mandatory report.
That is heavy.
Yeah.
But it underscores that our ultimate loyalty is to the safety of the client, not the agency or the supervisor. Let's do a rapid-fire summary for the listener. I'm going to list situations where you need to contact your supervisor immediately. Do not wait until your next scheduled meeting. Contact them that day. Ready?
Ready.
Number 1, you were offered an expensive gift or the family asks you for a discount. Contact your supervisor.
Always.
Number 2, a parent asks you to babysit, attend a birthday party socially, or go to their church. Contact your supervisor to establish mitigation. Number 3, a caregiver asks you to run a new program you haven't been trained for, or asks you to explain the science behind an intervention. Contact your supervisor.
Defer the design and explanation.
Number 4, Your regular BCBA quits or goes on leave, and nobody has scheduled supervision with you. Stop working and contact your clinical director immediately. And number 5, you notice unexplained bruises, extreme changes in hygiene indicating neglect, or hear a disclosure of abuse. Contact your supervisor and prepare to make a mandated report.
That is a phenomenal checklist to keep in your mind. When in doubt, communicate, over-communicate. You are never penalized for asking your supervisor an ethical question.
We have covered a massive amount of ethical ground today. For Section 6, let's synthesize all of this. Let's put this into practice for the listener who is preparing for their RBT exam right now. We are going to look at common mistakes, a specific scenario, and exactly how to navigate the test questions.
Let's start with the most common ethical mistakes RBTs make in the field, the pitfalls that lead to disciplinary action. The first is making treatment decisions independently. You see a behavior, you decide you know how to fix it, and you implement a consequence without the BCBA writing it into the plan.
The second is changing programs without approval. You decide the token board is boring, so you switch to a different reinforcement system without asking. Both are scope violations.
The third is what we discussed earlier. Discussing confidential information carelessly, chatting about a client in a restaurant, or posting a picture of your therapy materials on Instagram where the client's initials are visible in the background.
And the fourth is providing services without active supervision.
Let's engage in a detailed scenario to really test this out. This is exactly the kind of nuance you will see on the exam. Let's say you're an RBT doing an in-home session. You've been working with a 7-year-old client for 6 months. You have great rapport. The client's mother comes up to you, looking completely exhausted, and says, "We had a terrible morning. He is really struggling to tie his shoes, and the kids at school are making fun of him for wearing Velcro. I found this amazing video online about a new behavioral shaping way to teach shoe tying. It uses prompting and chaining. Can you please just spend 15 minutes today working on that with him? It would mean the world to me."
Okay, let's unpack this. As a human being, my immediate instinct is to say, of course I can help with that. You're stressed, he's getting bullied, let's grab some laces and figure this out. I know how to tie shoes. I've taught my own kids. I know what prompting and chaining are. It seems like a harmless, helpful request. Is this within my scope of practice to just do it?
Let's apply the rules we've discussed. Is it in your scope? The answer is a hard no. Let's break down exactly why this is strictly outside your scope of practice as an RBT, even though it seems so simple. First, the BCBA has not assessed the client's fine motor skills to see if they're even physically capable of tying shoes yet. Second, the BCBA has not designed a specific task analysis or chaining procedure for this client.
And third, I haven't gone through the 5 steps of supervision. I haven't been instructed, I haven't watched the BCBA model it, I haven't rehearsed it, I haven't received feedback, and I haven't been observed teaching this specific skill.
Exactly. Even though shoe tying is a basic life skill and you know how to do it in your personal life, teaching it as a clinical intervention requires behavioral design. Agreeing to do this constitutes making an independent treatment decision. You are acting as a BCBA in that moment.
So what is the exact right thing to say to the mother? I don't want to sound like a rigid bureaucrat and say,
No.
that's outside my scope, I refuse. That damages rapport.
You handle it with empathy but firm boundaries. You say, "I am so sorry to hear he's having a hard time at school with this. That sounds like an incredibly important goal for his independence. Because I'm the technician, I actually can't introduce new programs until the BCBA designs them and trains me on the specific steps for him. Let's message the BCBA right now together and ask if we can get a shoe tying program added to his plan for next week."
That is brilliant. You validate the parent, you agree that it's a good goal, but you defer the design to the supervisor. I think this scenario perfectly illustrates why so many people struggle with Domain F on the RBT exam. In helping professions, we want to fix problems immediately. The exam requires you to suppress that urge to just fix it yourself and instead forces you to follow the ethical chain of command.
That is the ultimate exam tip for Domain F. When you are reading a scenario on the test, the distractors, the wrong answers, will often sound very helpful and proactive. Create a quick visual schedule for the parent, or try using a different reinforcer to see if it helps, or explain to the teacher how extinction works. They sound like good things a smart person would do.
But they're all independent actions.
Exactly. If an exam question gives you a choice between changing the program yourself to help the kid, trying out a new method you read about, or contacting your supervisor, always choose contacting the supervisor. The exam wants to test your humility and your understanding of your boundaries. You implement, they design. The safest, most ethical action an RBT can take when faced with a novel situation is to seek supervision.
That is a phenomenal test-taking strategy. Look for the helpful but independent distractor and eliminate it. Look for the defer to supervisor answer. As we bring this massive deep dive to a close, let's lock in the most important takeaways. If I'm looking back at everything we've covered today, it feels like there are really 5 core pillars holding this entire ethical framework together. Let's summarize them.
I agree. Let's lay them out.
Rule number 1 is obviously the golden rule we started with. You implement the plan, the BCBA designs the plan. You never make independent treatment decisions, no matter how simple the request seems.
Absolutely. The architecture of the treatment must remain in the hands of the clinician with the advanced credential.
Rule number 2, competence and supervision. You only do what you have been actively trained, rehearsed, and supervised to do. Reading an article doesn't make you competent, and if your supervision stops, your practice stops.
Competence is a demonstrable skill validated by a supervisor. If you don't know or if you haven't been officially trained, you must ask.
Rule number 3, confidentiality. You must protect client privacy fiercely. No client information on your personal phone, no posting de-identified stories on social media, and no gossiping in the break room. You operate strictly on the need-to-know basis.
In the digital age, this requires constant vigilance. Your client's privacy is more important than your desire to share your workday.
Rule number 4, boundaries. You have to avoid multiple relationships. You are not their babysitter, you are their personal friend, and you are not their tenant. You maintain clear professional lines, and you politely but firmly decline expensive gifts or conflicts of interest.
Blurred boundaries destroy instructional control and clinical objectivity. Protect the relationship by keeping it strictly professional.
And finally, rule number 5, professionalism and humility. This means accepting feedback from your BCBA gracefully without getting defensive. It means practicing cultural humility by acknowledging your personal biases and not letting them dictate treatment. And it means being brave enough to speak up and report concerns, especially suspected abuse, even if it's uncomfortable.
Those 5 rules truly encapsulate the essence of Domain F. If a candidate deeply understands those 5 concepts, they will not only pass the exam, but they will thrive in the field. And before we go, I want to leave you, the future RBT listening to this, with one final, somewhat provocative thought to mull over as you study.
Let's hear it.
As an RBT, you are going to spend your entire day, every single day, taking meticulous data on other people's behavior. You will track their frequencies, you will time their durations, you will analyze their antecedents, and you will manipulate their consequences. Your eyes are always outward. But true ethical mastery in this field means learning to turn that clipboard around. It means taking invisible data on yourself. You must constantly track your own biases, your own emotional reactions to stress, your own limits of competence, and your own ego. Because when you can manage your own behavior ethically, you become the safest, most effective instrument of change for your clients.
So what does this all mean? It means the hardest behavior to manage is your own. Take data on yourself. That is a profound way to close this out. Thank you so much for guiding us through this today. And to you, the listener, we wish you the absolute best of luck as you finish your 40-hour training and conquer that certification exam. By mastering Domain F, you are not just checking a box to pass a test. You are stepping up to protect the vulnerable individuals you are about to serve, and you are upholding the standard of our entire profession. Keep studying, stay ethical, and we will catch you next time.